Good morning, and thank you everybody for joining us. We're going to allow a couple minutes as everyone comes in from the waiting room right now. But if you could take some time to, number one, if you came in under the wrong name, update your name in Zoom. There are a lot of Jennifer Dowds on this meeting. My apologies. I sent out a personalized link to everyone as your reminder. But if you could also put in the chat, introduce yourself there with your name, your organization or business, and your connection to food rescue or composting, that would be a great start. We do have a number of experts that are joining us today that may be able to respond to questions that you enter during the chat, during the webinar, but we are not going to be like pausing between speakers for Q&A. So please feel free to use the chat. I think we all have good questions and good answers, and we have the ones that people submitted with the registration that we're building into our discussion as well. All right, I think we're looking good. We have 74 people already in. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Gary Cunine, Executive Director and founder of 7 Generations Ahead, the host of this series of webinars. Gary?
Alrighty, thank you, Jen. And what a brilliant strategy to get your name out there to the public. I love it. As 7 Generations Ahead enters our 25th year, believe it or not, of driving solutions related to climate, equity, and sustainability, we're extremely thankful for all of the partners that we've collaborated with over the years to move this work forward. And it seems like a lifetime ago, but we're proud to have co-founded and launched the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition, the Wasted Food Action Alliance, with many partners who were on this call. And we're also equally excited about the momentum that has led to Senate Bill 2852, and thankful, of course, for the leadership of Senator Adriane Johnson and many of you on this call who've worked on this bill and who've been pushing this important piece of legislation forward. The Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition and other organizations really began focusing on policy and education and programs to advance the common sense strategy of taking food scraps out of the waste stream and converting them into usable compost to build our soils. And since 2012, shortly after we had a half-day Greentown conference session, and which led eventually to conversations about starting the Illinois Food Scrap Coalition. But since that time, over 100 now programs have been established, largely in part to, again, a lot of the people that are on this call doing the education and pushing these initiatives forward. We know that on the international level, through our participation in UN climate summits, we're acutely aware of how important reducing methane is as one of our best near-term solutions for achieving greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. And so we're very excited to see this piece of legislation move forward. Thanks to all of you. And Jen, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Gary. I'm actually pleased to turn it over to Senator Adriane Johnson, who is the wind behind what we're doing with this bill, to introduce herself and share more about this important bill. Senator?
Thank you. Thank you, Jen, and thank you all for joining us. Good morning, and welcome to the Food and Conserve webinar. I am Adriane Johnson, State Senator of the 30th District, representing roughly 230,000 residents, covering 15 municipalities. That's booked in between Wadsworth and Wheeling. I am so honored to be here with you this morning to talk about Senate Bill 2852. This legislative measure is a top priority for my team because a food recovery and food hierarchy law provides structured, legal, and ethical framework for tackling the massive economic, environmental, and social issues caused by food waste. It is also important because Senate Bill 2852 is an initiative of one of our former interns, Angela Wong. We are so proud that she crafted the initial iteration of the bill. During the seminar, we will cover what Senate Bill 2852 can do for Illinois and the changes that were made from last session's bill. It was filed under Senate Bill 1398, as most of you probably remember, incorporating stakeholder feedback from food rescue organizations, compost processors, waste industry, IEPA, and others. We will review findings from 3 studies on food rescue, composting, and job creation in Illinois. I am so proud to sponsor Senate Bill 2852 because it provides wins for people, wins for the economy, and wins for the environment. So let's talk about the wins for the people. It's a win for the people because of the significant increases in food donation. This is a food security initiative. 1 in 8 Illinoisans are food insecure. States with similar policies saw food donations jump significantly. For example, New York saw a 60% increase. And this ensures that high quality, edible food feeds our neighbors instead of going into landfills and fueling climate change. It's a win for the economy because it creates more jobs. This is a jobs creation bill. Reports from other states show job increases due to similar bills. An upcoming study by the National Resource Defense Council, or NRDC, will project Illinois' economic impact. And it is a win for the environment because it reduces methane emissions by diverting food waste from the landfills. This is a methane mitigation measure as well. Reduces food waste, reduces food for people, rescues food for people and animals, recycles food scraps through composting and anaerobic digestion. And just the keys to success for this, that includes programs like this and legislation and partnerships from all of you that provide education and improve infrastructure. And that's what Senate Bill 2852 will do. And with that, I will pass it back to Jennifer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. All right, as a quick note, a reminder, we're not going to be taking questions after each of our speakers. So if you have questions as they're talking, please feel free to add them to the chat and we can address them at the end. Also, if you came in and you are still named Jennifer Dowd, please feel free to rename yourself in Zoom so we can capture correctly who's asking those questions. Apologies for the link that was sent. I would now like to introduce Emily. Emily is she's the communications associate at the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, and she's going to share with us about the scope of the bill and some of the changes that have been made in response to stakeholder input. Emily, it's all yours.
Thank you, real Jennifer Dowd. So I'll just jump right in. Our legislation, our bill, was introduced during the 2025 legislative session. It started as Senate Bill 1398 and had an identical House Bill 1707. And we were able to sign on 14 Senate and 3 House co-sponsors. We also launched Feed and Conserve Illinois, the grassroots movement. And as of right now, we have over 470 individual supporters and more than 50 organizations supporting our legislation. We also, during the 2025 legislative session, introduced House Bill 1707 was heard in committee, and we had over 500 witness slips filed in support of House Bill 1707 when it was introduced, which was just a great show of support for our legislation. So in fall of 2025 and during the summer, Senator Johnson conducted stakeholder meetings, and based on stakeholder input, we've made amendments to the bill, which is Senate Bill 2852 now. So one of the first important parts of the bill is that it establishes a food scrap hierarchy. So this is a way of managing food and food scraps from most preferred to least preferred. first, we want to prevent food from being wasted, of course. And if we can't do that, then it would go to human consumption. If it can't be consumed by humans, then it'd be used in animal feed. If humans and animals cannot use the food, then it would go to compost or anaerobic digestion. The bill also features a gradual implementation period over 9 years. So this is to ensure that the infrastructure is in place for establishments to comply with the legislation. And this table is also featured in one of the flyer handouts that we'll link at the end of the presentation. So this bill also requires only covered establishments to comply with the bill requirements, and covered establishments are defined in the legislation as a commercial or institutional generator of essentially large amounts of food and food waste. So that would be restaurants, grocery stores, hotels, hospitals, and more. As Senator Johnson mentioned, we know that states that have implemented similar laws have seen food recovery organizations receive an influx of donations. And so we've decided to add provisions to protect these organizations from being overwhelmed with either just too much donation, or too many donations that are inedible for human consumption. So the first is the right to refuse donations. Food recovery organizations can also require that food donors enter into a contract with the organization. And then we also introduced a food diversion grant program, which would allocate $2 million per year from state fiscal years 2028 through 2032. And food recovery groups, as well as compost and anaerobic digesters, would be eligible for these grants. And then the last point I'll be talking about is that the market development component of the bill. So this requires state agencies and units of local government to buy compost and digestate to establish stronger markets for the compost and anaerobic digestate that would be created in larger amounts due to this bill. So Department of Natural Resources, Department of Transportation, and then Capital Development Board, as well as counties.
Great. Thank you very much, Emily. I know we have questions that are coming in the chat as well related to definitions and who would be overseeing that grant program. We may be able to get some answers going in the chat. Otherwise, we can bring it up at the end. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Stephanie Kotsaros, who is the founder and president of Brightbeat, a Chicago-based consultancy that activates environmental stewardship and social responsibility. I think an important thing to note is that Brightbeat supports city and county solid waste reduction and diversion goals. She develops awareness campaigns and helps businesses and institutions and organizations initiate equitable food rescue and composting and recycling programs. Stephanie's going to provide an overview to us of the findings of a recent study that she conducted through the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County and funding through Illinois EPA. Stephanie, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Jen. And as Jen mentioned, we did conduct this assessment. The kind of details are listed here on the slide. We examined food recovery and donation practices across Northern Cook County. It was executed on behalf of the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County and funded by the Illinois EPA. But what I'm sharing today reflects Brightbeat's findings, not the opinions or the recommendations of either agency, just to clarify. But you can see that we did have extensive outreach and engagement with businesses and organizations throughout this area. The number of surveys aligned with what we've seen statewide in other states. So we hope that the data we'll share is reflective of the sectors studied, which are noted. If you can go to the next slide, we'll share this. I went too early, but the work combined survey data, infrastructure mapping, and direct engagement of those sectors. And the most commonly reported practices that we saw, first and foremost, was composting. It was more common reportedly than food donation. And the responses suggested a correlation between those who were composting and those who had waste reduction goals. And we also learned that food donation often occurs informally and without tracking, which affects the existing data and kind of the invisibility of donation. If you can go to the next slide. The most common barriers that we heard based upon survey responses was training and operational costs. And that was largely due to time constraints and staffing limitations. And really all sectors on the donation side reported the need for more storage space across dry, freezer, refrigeration. And together, these barriers really help explain the gaps between surplus food and what's available and what is actually recovered. Next slide. So the reported donation activity and the volume that we received reports on from those survey responses on average showed grocery stores donating around 1,000 pounds per week. The weekly averages for restaurants were much smaller, and special event facilities can generate exponentially higher volumes of food. The food types are quite different and can vary in special events, as well as the consistency of the events themselves. What's important to note is that the ability to recover donated surplus really does depend on the matching between the food and the packaging. Is it bulk or individual meals that are being generated, and that which the capacity of a food recovery organization can match. So it's important to remember that. And then also to note that research conducted by DePaul University, and this is going back a few years, but they had found that fewer than half of the grocery stores that were studied, it was, I think, like 286 or something, over less than half of them had existing and active food donation partnerships. This was definitely something surprising to a lot who have seen this research. And what it indicates is that there is a belief or an understanding that we are really, really capturing all the food possible from grocery stores. But the research shows that that's not currently the case. I want to be clear that this does not indicate unwillingness, but rather it reflects a variation in the awareness, infrastructure, and potentially connection with recovery partners. You might consider that an opportunity. Next slide. So the recovery infrastructure conditions that we saw, we know that donation volume varies by region. We heard as much from a recent meeting in Springfield with the food banks of Feeding Illinois. But what we do know in Northern Cook County is that pantries are reporting rescues of around 5,000 pounds per week on average, with storage space able to receive more. They collaborate with each other and other recovery partners. Their rescue capacity is largely constrained by volunteers, not only the quantity of volunteers, but the physical capabilities of those volunteers, transportation, and timing. And while recovery capacity isn't infinite, the amount of surplus food being generated each week is staggering, as the next slide will show you. So this is just highlighting five, it's like a snapshot. So there's just 5 communities for easier visibility. But you can see here, thousands of pounds of weekly surplus food are estimated per community shown. This surplus is reflected from just 2 of the study sectors, restaurant and food service together, as well as grocery and mixed retail. using the data, I should note, is derived from September 2025 US EPA excess food opportunities. And restaurants and food service represent 30,000 to over 130,000 pounds of potentially rescued food per week per community, shown on this slide, while communities with grocery retailers may have 10 to 50,000 pounds of surplus generated weekly by that sector. The next slide, please, includes all 28 communities that we studied, and it's hard to read the fine print, but the combined surplus is in the millions. And I know there was a question that was provided in advance asking, what is the ROI for grocery stores? I'll share out in the chat the, over 2 million pounds of weekly total food that is generated by these two sectors alone. But I can tell you right now that the economic impact of this surplus food exceeds 143 million in terms of grocery and 385 million in restaurant economic costs of this surplus food. That's across all these communities, everything shown on this slide, to give you a sense of the scale of surplus food and the economic value of that food. So the next slide, a kind of overall snapshot. That is not the slide that I planned to show you here. That one was replaced, but I can just talk you through it. So the kind of 4 key findings that we felt are: number one, enormous volumes of surplus edible food is not reaching the emergency food system. And food businesses' awareness of tax incentives varies widely. And liability concerns persist despite legal protections that allow this food to be legally and safely donated. And lastly, food recovery requires coordination and capacity, not just surplus food. That said, the food recovery organizations made it clear they need more food and they need more donors. I'd like to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Stephanie. Apologies if we were missing a slide you planned to have there. We will be sending the slides out to everyone afterwards, so get to see what you were hoping they would see. But really nicely done, Steph. I wanted to say there are some questions in the chat for you as well. If you have time to get to it at this point, but some really good questions coming in. And maybe some of these things today, we're just getting a brief overview of 3 really significant studies, including ones that are ongoing. And so all of these questions may end up being inspirational for having a future webinar that digs a little deeper into some of this data, since a lot of people seem interested. But next, we're going to hear from Dr. Howard Rosing, Executive Director of the Stain Center and a faculty member in Community Service Studies at DePaul University. As a cultural anthropologist, his research covers sustainable food systems, urban food access, economic restructuring, and food justice movements in Chicago and the Dominican Republic. Dr. Rosing is going to share about what he's been researching in Chicago and tell us a little bit about Illinois grocery stores donating food or composting food scraps. Dr. Rosing?
Great, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be part of this, an honor to be part of it. I want to say that most of my work is focused on food producers. So it's really been interesting to explore the other end, where food can be wasted or rescued or composted in some fashion. And so working across the state is also nothing new to me, because we're mapping growers across the state as part of the Good Food Purchasing Initiative in Chicago and Cook County. So creating a mapping system really that documents, and a database that documents food waste and recovery across the state is an incredible challenge. Perhaps more challenging than identifying growers who could be part of the Good Food Purchasing Initiative in Chicago and Cook County, principally because we're engaging with lots of corporations, lots of large companies who don't often provide data easily on what they're doing for various reasons. Not necessarily because they don't want to in some cases. You often have to find the right person to talk to. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're finding the right people to talk to. And I'm going to demonstrate in a moment the mapping system and database system that we're developing, that's been developed and that's under development as we speak, actually. Um, the the program that I actually teach mainly in is a graduate program in sustainable urban development, which is a program I co-direct, and I direct a graduate certificate program in sustainable urban food systems. And that led to this project um, initiated with the Feed and Conserve Illinois Coalition this last fall to develop this mapping and database system to identify the best actors. Who are the best actors in the state, the best players who are doing the work already at the retail food level to either donate or recover or in some fashion food from their stores. So we created a mapping system, as I'll point out in a moment, and I'll demonstrate it for you. And we're populating that system with those players, those best actors. Um, and I wonder if you can jump to the next screen. You could see the questions on this one, that previous screen that we're asking. Who are these folks? We have a lot of other questions, by the way, besides just identifying who they are and finding out if they donate and or compost. Eventually, we want to get details on how they actually are benefiting as a store, as a company from it, and also how communities are benefiting from what they're doing. This is a system that I'm going to demonstrate for you for the last half of my presentation that is actually going to need a lot of hands. What you're looking at there is what we're about to demonstrate, and it involves thousands of stores. Right now, we are beginning with stores that accept SNAP in two categories, supermarkets and superstores. And so that's actually just two categories among 6 or 7 categories of stores that we want to incorporate into this mapping system. In addition to that, we're identifying the composters across the state and anaerobic digesters, of course, and as well as the food banks, which is all represented in different dots and figures that you're seeing in this map. That is also, and eventually, it's a big task, but we want to think about the food pantries also, who could be accepting directly from food stores and who do in many cases. We just finished a study in Cook County that found food pantries across Cook County accepting food from growers in Cook County all over the place. So, and not through a food bank. So we want to think about how food stores might be connected directly to food pantries and not necessarily via food banks. All right, I'm going to share my screen now and offer you a brief intro to what we're doing. Again, this is going to take a lot of hands. So this is also a call out for help. So we can use all the hands and communicators that we can find to support this populating this mapping system. So right now you're seeing a blank map, and that's because everything is turned off. And I want to just point out again, what we did was we took the database from the USDA of SNAP stores, and we documented into the data or populated into the database superstores and supermarkets. So basically, I'm going to turn those on, and you could see these are the superstores across the state, and these are whoops. This is Yes. Okay, superstores and supermarkets. So I'm going to leave both of those on. And this is an interactive ArcGIS database and mapping system. And then the second thing we did, as I mentioned, is we identified all the food banks across the state, which you can't see super good, but they're these little houses here, little buildings. And I will zoom in so you can get a sense of what one looks like. Let's see, there's not that many. Here's one over on Border. Here's this one in Rockford. I think that's Northern Illinois Food Bank and so forth. All right, so that is basic layers. Then we also layered in the composting facilities that accept food scraps in Illinois. And then we added the anaerobic digester, which is one. So all of these are in a legend in the system that actually provides a description of what each of these figures are. And so as you can see, there's only one anaerobic digester in the state on the south side of Chicago, of course, Green Era, which is represented by this beautiful purple dot there, purple diamond, actually. And so now, where does the data come into play? Right now, we've contacted hundreds of supermarkets and superstores. Again, this represents only a portion of the grocers in retailers, food retailers in Illinois. And we're starting to look at them via the perspective of where they are via the proximity to those food banks. So as you can see, we have a 10-mile radius. So those stores within that 10-mile radius of the food bank would be the low-hanging fruit. They have easy access. And so we're contacting in those buffer zones, those stores first, the ones that are in proximity to donating. Obviously, we want food donated in the state before even composting. We want to feed people, especially with SNAP cuts, et cetera, and food insecurity in general across the state. But we're also looking at that buffer zone within the context of the composting facilities. And so here's a 10-mile buffer zone to composting facilities. Again, they overlap oftentimes with based on sort of municipalities. You could see the blue circles now are the composting buffer zone of 10 miles from a composter. And so those, again, are the stores we're populating as much as we can across the state. As we speak, I have my coder, and I'm going to end with this. We're almost ready to launch a feature that shows the stores, only the dots on the map, that have our best players, our best actors. So the next version of this map that you see, you'll be able to click on and off those stores that we know for sure are either donating or composting. And then the trick is, how do we highlight those stores? How do we promote those stores as the best actors, as exemplary in the state, as the folks who should be providing a model for all grocers across the state? I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Howard. I really appreciate that. And I know that this is hopefully everyone got a sense of just how complicated our food system is, and making the connections, whether it's connecting food from growers or food that could be rescued and recovered, is really important and challenging work. And so I would shout out what Dr. Rosing said at the beginning, which is volunteers always welcome to help with this effort, because it often involves, and I guess Stephanie from Brightbeat could say the same thing in terms of how laborious it can be doing outreach to find the right person and talk to them. I would like to introduce our final presenter today. Darby Hoover is the Senior Resource Specialist, Environmental Health and Nature at the Natural Resources Defense Council. And Darby is going to provide us with a sneak peek into the NRDC study on the potential for Illinois to see economic benefits from enacting this bill. Darby?
Thank you very much. As Jennifer said, I'm going to present on some research that is not available publicly yet, but stay tuned. This is a sneak peek. We will be doing a press release in the next several weeks with a fact sheet. Next slide. Statewide food waste diversion policies are some of the most effective tools that we have to keep good food out of landfills and incinerators and on people's plates. Increasing food waste diversion rates yields important environmental benefits like less waste and lower emissions, keeping more edible food out of landfills, cutting methane and other harmful emissions, supporting healthier soils through composting, and encouraging businesses to reduce waste in the first place. These policies can also serve as a catalyst or market signal for investment in food processing infrastructure, like composting, food rescue, and anaerobic digestion. These developments stimulate local economies through job creation and collection, processing, and distribution networks. Food waste diversion policies, when paired with strategic infrastructure development, function as engines of green growth, aligning environmental objectives with economic vitality. Next slide, please. So how do we do this research? To understand the potential impact of a food scrap diversion policy in Illinois from an economic perspective, NRDC hired the consultant ICF to model economic outputs by combining current employment metrics, surveys of relevant stakeholders, and existing literature to estimate possible diversion rates and project industry growth in the state. The study and modeling were based on similar research ICF conducted in Massachusetts to gauge the impact of their policy. Next slide, please. We developed different scenarios based on what we've seen in the 11 states that have already passed food waste diversion policies. The first scenario looked at a blanket comprehensive policy that would require all food waste to be diverted from disposal in landfills or incinerators. This sweeping scenario would have the biggest impact, but as we know, very few of the 11 existing state food waste diversion policies are this comprehensive, and so we modeled a few alternatives as well. A comprehensive scenario provides the greatest economic and environmental benefits. States like Vermont and California have taken this approach. Senator Johnson's bill, as it currently stands, does not completely align exactly with any of the scenarios we included in this research, but it is most similar to an alternate scenario we ran, which excludes small generators like households, as well as a few other categories of institutions that each produce a small amount of food waste. States like New York and Massachusetts have taken this approach. And all the scenarios we ran have a delayed start and a tiered threshold for generators coming into compliance. Next slide, please. The results. So preliminary results, subject to change as we continue to refine this study. 14, under our comprehensive scenario, 14,000 new jobs created across the state. $3.8 billion generated in industry activity. That's the total economic output from businesses and services directly or indirectly involved in food waste diversion. $172 million in tax revenue generated due to supply chain impacts and economic ripple activity. 2.2 million tons of food waste diverted away from landfills each year, and 9 million over the course of 10 years. Less climate pollution, equivalent to 9 million metric tons of CO2, which is the same amount of emissions as taking 2 million cars, approximately 1 in 5 cars in Illinois, off the road for a year. That's the approximate equivalent reduction. Next slide, please. Oh, no, well, we can go back. I won't read you the bottom line, but the small generator exclusion, just to note that residents do account for 36% of food waste generated in Illinois, and a scenario that does not include them would have a smaller impact. So the small generator exclusion scenario is what we have on the bottom there. Let's note it's still pretty significant in terms of jobs and industry activity and economic ripple activity, etc. Next slide, please. So key takeaways, food waste diversion can lead to significant economic opportunity in Illinois. Cities, counties, and the industry can act now to support jobs, revenue, and emissions reduction. And policy design matters. More comprehensive approaches deliver the greatest economic and climate benefits. So what's next? For us, we're in the process of publishing the results of this research. Again, this was a sneak peek for this audience. And we'd like to thank Senator Johnson for her commitment to reducing food loss and waste. And thanks to the Feed and Conserve Illinois Coalition for putting on this webinar and inviting us to present.
Thank you, Darby. Greatly appreciate all the support that NRDC has given, not just on the national level, but especially here in Illinois. NRDC has been a very active part of Feed and Conserve and helping us know and learn from what other states are doing and have done successfully. Senator Johnson, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks everyone for joining us. So you're probably asking why Feed and Conserve. And we know that there's a surplus that exists, and while there's a need to grow in Illinois, Illinois already produces significant surplus to food. And we want to make sure that we address the food insecurity concerns. And we know that grocery stores offer the biggest opportunities, as was discussed in the previous presentations. And so we want to continue to look to that. And then we know that infrastructure unlocks the impact, and cold storage and transport allow food banks to safely accept food donations. And, we mentioned that Senate Bill 2852 is about food recovery and diversion bill, and it reduces food waste, and it helps rescue food for our neighbors who are food insecure, and it creates jobs and protects our environment. And so Senate Bill 2852, as we said, it will feed our communities, our neighbors, and it creates jobs, and importantly too, it reduces methane emissions. Okay, next slide. Oh, so here we go. Do I do the call to action? That's on the agenda, so I don't know.
You absolutely can.
But I want to start off by saying, first and foremost, thank you all again for being here. The first step was joining the call today, so thank you all for joining the call. But here's the call to action. So we talked about Senate Bill 2852 being a win for people, the economy, and their environment. But we want you to sign up on the Feed and Conserve Illinois website. That would be a great start if you're not on it already, for updates. And you heard from Emily, she shared that more than 500 people slipped in support for the bill last time. So we're asking you to submit witness slips in support of the bill. When things are moving, when the bill is moving, we certainly need your support. We want to surpass the 500 that Emily mentioned early on. And we're also asking you to call or write to your legislators to encourage them to sign on as co-sponsors and to make sure they support this bill. And you can find their information on ilda.gov or ilga.gov. And please add a link to and info about the Food and Conserve Illinois to your website or social media. That would be great. And again, we thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I do think before open up for questions. I do want to just say you can also scan the QR code that's on this slide to sign up for Feed and Conserve Illinois. And let everybody know who has filed witness slips in the past that the system has changed a little bit in Illinois and this year. And so you'll have to sign in and create a new account. And there are a couple new steps that you take. It's still easy, but different than what we sent out education-wise last year. Illinois Environmental Council is creating a quick overview of those changes. So we will share that through Feed and Conserve Illinois. We'll make sure that it's out on social media. We want to make this as easy as possible. So we do need all of you to be making these changes and taking action, because this is the way we can get this through. I would like to open it up to Q&A at this point. I think we've got about a little over 10 minutes left, and we have some good questions that have come in the chat, and I've seen a lot of questions and answers. So I would first open it up to our speakers. If you've seen one that's interesting and you'd like to bring up and address out loud, please feel free to start with that. And then if there's one that hasn't gotten answered yet in the chat, if you're a participant, we'll open it up to you right after that. Hearing a resounding silence, I'm assuming that every one of our speakers and experts has answered most of the questions in the chat, which I appreciate. And I would invite any of the participants to raise your hand. And if you can't raise your hand, then just unmute and feel free to ask a question.
Hello, I just put a question in. I'm wondering if a local grocery store, like a Jewel that I saw the other day, a dumpster was full of bananas and potatoes and all of this stuff, which I witnessed. Usually the gate is closed, but there it was. Is it their individual choice whether to try to divert that food, or is it generally a corporate choice?
I guess this is Stephanie, and being that we conducted the study, I will say that, not speaking on behalf of grocers, but just what we witnessed in the field, there are corporate commitments to executing certain practices, and we would learn about that, but not always see that practice enacted, at the grocery store level. So it might be more of a question of how a business is able to carry the commitments and standard operating procedures or practices through to each store. Anyone else could speak, but that's one thing. Maybe a store level decision isn't really the way to say it, but store level execution is also necessary in order to maximize food donation.
From my understanding, Jewel at one time had 172 stores committed to the program and have less than 5, I believe, actively continuing to compost their food scraps.
That's disappointing.
It's a cost factor, I think, but
Probably. And infrastructure, all the things that you all have been talking about, and I'll be quiet now.
We found in contacting or looking at materials from Illinois food banks that in some cases stores and some are donating to some food banks, but not in other parts of the state. So I think it is kind of reflective of what Stephanie is suggesting in terms of the corporate stores, which is mainly what we're looking at this point.
Hi, I'm Jenny Futterman from Highland Park. Has there been any look into like having Uber Eats drivers connect food and people who need it, or businesses, is that, or, those type of drivers, maybe to move food to places or people?
Thank you for the question. And That's a great suggestion. You may know this already, Jennifer, but Uber Eats and others are working with the Northern Illinois Food Pantry and Bank and others to do exactly that, deliver food to people. And so there's a lot of things that can come out in the rulemaking. So do appreciate that feedback.
Thank you. Adam, I saw your hand was up and it's now down. Did you mean to put it down?
I put my question in the chat, but kind of wanted to ask the question that Stephanie answered in reverse. You mentioned that there were some corporate groceries that had specific policies or goals for diversion, but not every location was engaged. Did you find the opposite where local grocers or individual stores wanted to participate, but their corporate policies or their concern about corporate intervention prevented them from doing so?
You know, I can't speak to the motivation of individual store levels, but I can say that we did uncover, I don't want to say common, but repeatedly, that there were donation practices going on that were informal and not tracked. So that just might speak to the fact that maybe some decisions are being made at a level that is not corporate and not being reported corporately. Again, I can't speak to the motivation, but we did recognize that there's some informal systems that are really supporting the emergency food system.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Adam, and thank you, Stephanie, for the answer. Let's go to Amy O'Rourke.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. I have a question. How does this bill further align or maybe differ from SB 2876, which was in implementation in 2025, which requires large event facilities to recycle, compost, and support food donation? I know Cook County is actively supporting, education and supporting implementation of this. Is it specifically that this entails more covered entities, or can you speak to the ways that this new bill will further support what's already kind of underway?
You raise a good point, Amy. I do believe there's overlap in what Senate Bill 2852 would do and the large event law that's currently on the books. So that's something that we may or may not need to address in the bill. But the thing that is in 2852 is a state enforcement mechanism, not a local level enforcement mechanism. So that's probably something that we need to talk about with the senator a little bit more. But the large event law also requires recycling in addition to composting. So it's slightly different and it's more focused than the senator's bill, which is broader in scope.
Thank you so much.
Great question, and thank you, Walter, for the answer. We have about 5 minutes left for Q&A, so I would say we'll get through as many as we can, but if you haven't had a chance to put your question in the chat, please do so in case we don't make it to it, because we will be sending out answers. And Stephanie added that this policy requires, and the other is recycling and composting only. So that is a big difference between the two in terms of feeding our neighbors. Thank you, Steph. Susan Casey.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Senator Johnson and all the presenters. Appreciate it. I have more of a procedural question. Just wondering, as language in the bill gets changed or amended, will all of those kinds of amendments show up on the IGA website so that we're all aware of those changes, or is there another process?
Yeah, hi, Susan. I'll answer the question. So once the bill is moving, Walter mentioned that this bill has not posted yet. Actually, Senate Bill 1398 is advanced, but of course we are not moving that bill. We're moving Senate Bill 2852. And once the bill is assigned to, Senate Bill 2852 is assigned to a committee, then we're able to attach the amendment, and the amendment will be heard in committee because it has to be heard in committee as well. And then, yes, then the original language and the mandatory language will be on ILGA so that you'll be able to see that.
We will
Thank you.
also
You're welcome.
provide updates on the Feed and Conserve website. You know, we'll update our flyers. We'll keep people updated. I mean, that is the, you know, it can be frustrating, right, to follow legislation in Springfield because some things can pop up unexpectedly, but that's kind of the nature of the process. And so we really do want to use the website to help you navigate the changes. And so, you know, get signed up and get to stay up to date on that stuff.
Website and email directory, which is why we have you sign up for the email directory so we can send you emails and update you on any progress.
So before I jump to the next question, I did want to note that a couple questions have come up before about if there are specific amendments that are already up for discussion right now. And Senator Johnson, I know there's been thought given to the food diversion grant program being brought in a different way. Is that something that you would want to let people know about today or get any input on?
Well, we're still working through that. I was on the call with IEPA the other day, and we're still looking for clarity. And so I want to make sure that we have accurate information and we know what we're going to do with that piece before communicating. So maybe that could be something that we'll update everyone on the website because we're still working through that. I know there was a question in the chat, and thank you very much. Is this something that DCEO will administer the grant? And so we're going to have some answers to those questions and more clarity on that, and then we'll get back to everyone.
Great. Thank you very much. Sorry for putting you on the spot about it, but I know
that's okay. That's okay, Jennifer. This is great. But before we move on, I want to also address, there was a number of questions in the chat about why schools were excluded. I know Seema, she's up next to ask her question from K through 12. And that's something that we should talk through because, you know, and we're open to looking at that. So thank you all so much for your feedback on that. And we need to address why didn't we consider that, and you know, what can we do to consider that? And I know there was a question about how do you educate K through 12, and you know, it's important that the youth are involved in this process, and we do care deeply about that. You know, we advanced a bill for climate change for students to get involved and to be empowered and to be a part of that process. And so we're going to regroup and work on how can we incorporate that or consider it for sure in the amendment. Did we address your question, Seema? Because I know you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Senator Johnson. That was just to reiterate that, you know, schools are important. And as you know, the work in our schools where we try to divert a lot of that wasted food, and we estimate it's, you know, somewhere between 50 to 60,000 pounds of food waste in 1 year. So it'd be great to get schools added on. But thank you for all the work in bringing this bill forward.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, all of you. Yes, I wanted to say thank you again to Senator Johnson and her staff for their leadership on this bill, and to all of our presenters today, Emily, Stephanie, Howard, Darby, and others who have chimed in the chat and to provide answers. We definitely look forward to continuing to work together to support this bill and keeping food out of landfills and feeding our neighbors, most importantly. We can go ahead. I know we have a couple of our speakers who have offered to stay on the line a little bit longer if there are more questions, but I didn't want to miss this opportunity to, on behalf of 7 Generations Ahead, thank you for being a part of the first of our series of webinars in 2026. And thank you, everyone. Are there any other questions that you would like to discuss while you have all of us here, or at least some of us here?
Can I make a plug for our next webinar, March 17th? 2 p.m. I'm completely blanking on the title that we agreed that we decided on, but it's going to be covering specifically schools that share tables, food recovery in schools, and really how to do it practically and safely, looking at the food safety side and how to work with your local health departments. So please join us for that.
Becky is the primary audience for that upcoming webinar, schools and school districts.
Yeah, it will. We are really trying to reach anybody who could possibly be involved in share tables in schools. So it could be school administrators, teachers, food service staff, but also local health departments. We would love to have them there as well.
Walter, there was a question in the chat that I think you may be able to answer. It relates to, it was 11:55 April. Does this include both packaged and unpackaged food as source separated organics in terms of the definition of the legislation itself?
Yeah, if you have food that's packaged, then yes, that would still be something that we would want to, that would be covered by this law. And that's why we do provide what we call a food processing facility. I believe that's really a depackaging facility. So we know in these other states that a lot of stuff is off spec or old and it's still packaged. So we need to be depackaged if it's not fit for human or animal feed consumption. So yes, packaged would have to be separated from the rest of the garbage or the waste that would go to landfill.
All right. Well, I would make one last plug for if you're not already signed up for Feed and Conserve Illinois, that is the place to learn about any updates, any changes. You can also just know that one of the key actions you can be taking is helping call your stakeholders, your policy stakeholders, and getting them to be in support of this bill, whether as a sponsor or ready to vote for it when it comes up for vote. But we need that, and we're just at the beginning of that process. So we will be sharing information that you can put out on social media, things you can add to your own website or send to your own networks. But this is the way we're going to help make change here in Illinois. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time today, your excellent questions, and we look forward to seeing you on a future discussion. And Senator Johnson, if it hasn't been called out, stated really firmly, some of the differences between last year's bill and this year's bill have come because Senator Johnson has taken the time to meet with stakeholders and have discussions, answer questions, find out what was important. And that has been an amazing process that you have been willing to give your time to. And I just want to personally thank you for all that you've done to make this bill one that is going to really have an impact in Illinois.
You're welcome. I want to thank all of you experts, and you all care deeply about our environment, care deeply about, addressing food waste. And so I just can't thank you enough. And of course, Jennifer, all of the amazing team at SGA, and all of you, the speakers, and Walter, Emily, and your team as well, and Jennifer thanked all of you, but I want to thank you again because it is very important to get your feedback. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, and Jennifer definitely alluded to it, it was important to hold these stakeholder meetings so that we are addressing your concerns of the industry, as well as IEPA. It's really important. One of the things that we don't do on my team, we don't just push any legislation through because we figure we can. It has to be meaningful, it has to be robust, and it has to be able to be implemented. And we feel that we can do that. And thank you all today for your feedback, because we have a different perspective. And as we are amending the language, we have an opportunity to incorporate some of your suggestions as well. So thank you all very much for that. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank my team, Mackenzie and Armaya, and our incredible interns. You all are going to see, if you just tune in to the session, 6 of my bills for this session was written, researched by interns, and they are moving along the process. We're so proud of them. You know, our interns, they don't get coffee or make copies for us. They actually write and do the research. And our future is so bright with these amazing young leaders. And as I mentioned in my opening remark, our former intern, Angela Wong, she actually wrote the bill and it's been through a few iterations and from great input from all of you and the coalition. You know, but I do recall when LRB received the draft, they asked who wrote the bill. They were surprised when we told them one of our interns. And so with all of you, with your input, making it better, this bill, and we're going to really work hard to get it to the finish line. So as Jennifer says, we need all of your support, all of the call to action, you know, bullet points that we shared. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you all for all that you do every day to protect our environment.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you again on the next Zoom. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, FGA. See you, Senator.